Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another Free Real Estate Advice Fridays. This is episode number 32. I have a little bit of time today, as usual. Friday's pretty busy. Bunch of showings today, but I wanted to make sure I pop on here. I'm actually a little earlier than I have been lately, just because my showings are a little bit earlier. But hope everyone's doing well, enjoying this nice weather. I think we got a couple of nice days of weather coming up. I always try to plug something on here. Usually try to do local businesses, but I'll plug something that's like not necessarily local right now. Um, Levon Helm Studios. I've actually worn the sweatshirt or T-shirt a couple times on previous episodes, but if you are into music like I am, as many of you know, I have a little bit of a past in the music industry, and always wanted to go to Levon Helm Studios while he was still alive. And I skipped a few opportunities to do that just because it was a while ago. I didn't have quite the financial resources I do now. So I never quite got there. And then, of course, Levon passed away. But the studio itself is still actively running and doing very well. Amy Helm, Levon's daughter, runs it now, and they have all sorts of national touring acts through there. It's obviously still kind of a mecca for that level of band. The band that I saw last night was Bonnie Light Horseman, pretty well-known band on the indie scene, and they were fantastic. And I just point out the band because it's usually that level of band, like semi well-known independent bands. You're not going to get your A-listers through there, although they do occasionally do that because it is still a bit of a mecca. So but if you ever get the opportunity, it's only about 2 hours from where I'm sitting, so we actually just make it into a day trip. I have stayed there. Airbnb options up there are fairly limited, especially this time of year. But Woodstock's a great town if you haven't been there, and the experience at the studio is fantastic. It's the staff there is just super nice and very laid back and carefree. There are rules in place, but they're very the way they kind of apply the rules is very nice. It's just a very nice experience, and you definitely get the feeling that you're just basically spending the day on someone's property. So like once you're in and you do your vaccine check or whatever kind of COVID protocol they're following, which largely depends on the band. The venue has its own protocol, but then the band last night asked for masks. But they're great. Like once you take care of that at the front gate, you're in, and there's nothing else. You can come and go as you please, and from the venue to the parking lot, it's just very laid back. It's a great experience. So if you haven't had the opportunity, then go do that. So I always try to plug something. I've mentioned many times that if you have anyone that runs an independent business, even if it's like an online business or something, just give me a call because I'd love to have some guests on here to talk about their business. It's been about a year since I've had a guest. I had Dasset Inspections on here about a year ago, and I think we're due for some. But honestly, it's just so hard for me to schedule them and like reach out and try and solicit someone to come onto this thing. And so if you know anyone that wants to plug a business and wants to just do like a quick 5 to 10 minute interview with me about their business, please always reach out to me or message me or anything. For those of you that are watching, I see a few people watching now. If you have any questions along this whole time, just go ahead and post in the comments. Feel free to just say hi because I actually can't see who's watching. But if you have any real estate questions, just go ahead and pop them in the comments, and I'll be happy to answer them. All right. So I want to give a couple market updates. There's a article that came out. I forget what the date of the article is. I'm going to bring it up here on my other screen. Let me do a little rearranging here. Article came out this week that had some very interesting market data that I thought was does a very good job of kind of addressing some of the popular talking points that are out there right now. So let me just bring that article up real quick so I can go over some of the key points of it. But I think when you see this data for the current market, it'll give you a lot of context for what we're seeing out there. And I'm going to read off some of these points because these are kind of national data. And I'm going to tell you how that kind of relates to our market here in Hunterdon County, because Hunterdon County is always a little bit of an outlier. We're obviously just lower population density, different price points, relatively speaking, low taxes. So some of the points here are slightly nuanced in terms of how they apply to Hunterdon County, but I definitely think it's worth talking about some of these. So let me talk about a few of these. So this article, like I said, I'm in a lot of online communities and everything that discuss real estate at a very high level, which I think is very important. You should always make sure that your agent is pretty tied into the business end of things. There are a lot of things that we do as realtors that you don't need a business degree or a knowledge of economics or anything to know. But if you do happen to get with a realtor that kind of loops this into the strategy of what you're doing, I think it is very important. I do like to, um, mention to people that is my background. So I do tend to lean on these things a little bit more than maybe your average realtor. There is just isn't a lot of realtors with MBAs. It's not like I plan to be a realtor with an MBA. It's just that was my past, and here I am as a realtor sitting here with an MBA and the bills to prove it. So. But I want to talk about some of these points. So the main headline of this article, and this particular article was on CNBC, but this article's been making the rounds with multiple news sources. So you can find it with many different sources. Basically, the same article is a very quick article. But this pertains to reporting on prices in March as opposed to March 1 year ago. Now, 1 year ago in March, we're now 2 years out from when the pandemic started. So 1 year ago, we were 1 year out from when the pandemic started. Now, I think that most realtors would tell you that we actually saw the market kind of turn over into its current state of very seller heavy market before the pandemic. And I would probably start pointing to like December of 2019. Pandemic started in March of 2020. And the interesting part of that is when everyone was shutting down work and getting furloughed, or all the things that started happening when we first started shutting down, real before the vaccines were out and everything else. And everyone was like, what is this thing? And it really was a shutdown. Real estate did not stop. So I worked through the entire thing. In fact, for the longest time in my household, I was the only one really leaving the house because we had this crazed market happening. And I think the key point is that the pandemic didn't slow it down one bit. It continued. So that's why I was active through that whole time. In fact, I would argue thriving during that whole time. So where are we today? So we've worked through a ton of inventory because so many sellers have taken advantage of this market and sold their homes. And, there's only so many homes to be sold. It is a finite number. New construction is tough, particularly out here in Hunterdon, because there's just, there's not that many desirable lots left to build a house. So again, this article is looking at March of 2022, the March we just passed, compared to March of 2021, a year past the period that I'm initially talking to, which the start of the pandemic, when things were, quite high. So prices actually rose 20% in that time. That is significant. So in other words, 2 months ago, we are still seeing 20% raise in prices to the year before. If you had told me that in March of 2021, that in 1 year prices would go even higher, I would have said you're crazy. There's no way that's going to happen. We're at the peak now. Obviously, that is not the case. Maybe we haven't even hit the peak yet. Maybe this is the peak. I'm not sure. But the point is, as I sit here right now, prices are still going up. The interesting side point to this is that our interest rates are going up quite a bit. So they gave the number, and this is just over the past few months. At the start of January, the average rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage at the start of January 2022, so 5 months ago, was the average rate was 3.29%. Again, kind of a historically low rate. In that range of time, I know my clients, some of them actually were under 3 because that's the average, obviously. So I had some clients that were like 2.8 and stuff like that. That was in January. Now at the end of March, the average rate, and I realize it is not now the end of March, but that's the most recent data we have. This article is actually from Tuesday, so it's a very current article. But the average rate in March is 4.67. So in the span of January to March, 2 months, we I guess kind of 3 months because it was beginning of January, end of March, we went up 1.4%, give or take. And that is not insignificant. If you're a buyer, and you're fairly engaged in this process at this point, you will know that's going to significantly affect your buying power. So what happens generally, just basic economics like 101, obviously, is, we see the rise in interest rates, and that means less buying power for buyers. You should have some level of that price coming down. But you also have this third variable, which is simple again, 101 type economics here, supply and demand. The demand is still through the roof. So this relatively significant raise in interest rates is not offsetting the unstoppable demand for used homes, really resales as we call them. So I think that's worth noting. I mean, if you're a seller right now, you didn't miss out on anything yet. Who knows how this is going to go? I mean, I said the same thing a year ago. I said I would have called you crazy for telling me that prices were up 20% a year ago to today. I didn't know that this was going to happen with the interest rates, but it is still very surprising. So if you are a seller, you haven't missed out on anything yet. There's still time. I was saying a year ago that I felt like a lot of my listings a year ago were of the FOMO variety, fear of missing out, sellers that were like, they watched everything happen over the prior year. And they said, geez, you know what? We know we're going to sell within the next few years. We just got to do it now because these prices are crazy. And that was not a bad decision because, you only want to get into speculating so much on real estate. The people that are really trying to hit the peak generally, that's a risky proposition, obviously. Now, this is all contextual, right? Because I think the reason that the demand is kind of superseding this increase in interest rates is very simple, is that even at 4.67, which is end of March's average mortgage rate, these are still historically low numbers. I mean, there were times in relatively recent history that rates were significantly higher. So, and don't even ask about like my parents' generation. Now, granted, that was a much lower price point, but regardless, there were rates, 12% back in the past, but we haven't obviously seen that in a very long time. But, will this affect your buying power? Yes. Is it affecting pricing? No. And you're still at 4.6%. Is there reason to believe that this might go down again as things kind of stabilize? We know that inflation's out of control at this point, and there are so many unknowns in our economy currently. So yeah, I mean, it could potentially go down. So you could always leave the option open of refinancing. I mean, if you're going to own a house for a long time, there's a good chance that your interest rates are going to go like this anyway. So you'll probably have an opportunity to refinance. Now, when rates were at 2.4. I think it would be safe to say that you probably nailed it and you probably won't need to refinance. But at 4.6, maybe there will be an opportunity down the road to refinance. So, it does affect buying power. It's not affecting prices. And for sellers, you are still in the peak of this market. So I don't think there's any reason to think that you missed the boat, so to speak. Who knows how long that's going to last, but that is the situation as it sits here. Now let's talk anecdotally, and let's talk a little bit about Hunterdon County. I would say anecdotally, we have seen a bit of an uptick in inventory. Nothing major, not as much as I think any of us would like, but there has been a bit of an uptick. Let's see if we can pull any other numbers out of this article. Yeah, these numbers are based on 20 city composites. They point out that, obviously there are some markets they mention in here, Tampa, Phoenix, and Miami continue to be the highest markets, ranging from 34.8% to 32% increase in prices over the past year. And keep in mind, again, that is coming off of, if you looked at the previous year, you would see similar growth. So over the course of 2 years, it's just unbelievable the way the prices have gone up. Yeah, those of us who have been anticipating a deceleration in the growth rate of U.S. home prices will have to wait at least a month longer. I've been telling people for a long time, I don't see it happening anytime soon. There's just such little demand, and there are so many buyers right now that I just don't see it happening anytime soon. Markets with the smallest gains Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., and Chicago, both all around that 12 to 13% range. So even in our lowest ones, we're still seeing double-digit growth over the past year. The expectation is that prices will begin to ease since home sales have been falling now for several months. So that's number of sales that has been falling. As we know, the inventory is extremely limited. So naturally, there's only so many transactions that can happen. That's been going on for several months. Sorry, I hope you can't hear that. It's an ad that was playing. Demands, however, still high. Real estate agents report they are still seeing multiple offers for homes that are priced correctly. Definitely true. I tell people constantly the worst thing you can do in this market is overprice your house because you don't want to box people out. Here's the reality of the situation is if you overprice a house, you're going to get people that are just like, oh, I'm not even going to go. I said this last week, but I'm not even going to go look at it because it's listed at, 800,000. And I know people are going to go way overbid and it's going to go for 850. And that's just ridiculous. That's not necessarily how it goes. Houses still do get overpriced and they do sit. So if you pick a house out and you have an agent who does their homework and does their comps and comes back and says, you know what, I think they may have overpriced this one by about 50 grand. There is an opportunity there to say, well, let's put in an offer near asking price or maybe even under or maybe just a little bit over. It's not an automatic that it's listed at X and it's going to sell for X plus Y. That is not a blanket rule. Does it happen a lot in this market? Yes, because if it's priced properly, just market value, then someone's going to put a premium on it because there is such a demand. And that premium's 20 or 30 grand or 40 grand, or depending on price point, could be 80 grand if it's a high priced house. But there are still houses going for asking price and below it. We did this activity probably a few months ago on this. I took people through sold listings. I was writing the MLS and I said, here's the listing price and here's the eventual selling price. And we found that the average price in Hunterdon County was about 7,000 under asking. Now, obviously that included some very big numbers and some outliers. And when I took the outliers away, it was about six grand over asking price. That's the average. So it's not as dramatic as the popular talking points out there would have you believe. Now that's Hunterdon County. If you go to Somerset, Middlesex, Union County, Monmouth, Ocean, very different numbers. It's really a county by county story. But Hunterdon has, while being, what I think all of us Hunterdon realtors would tell you, being a very hot market, has been relatively reasonable as opposed to the national level talking points. And I think that's going to continue. A lot of people have decided to come to Hunterdon that previously weren't considering it. That is definitely a fact. A good portion of my clients are, coming in from Hunterdon and have never lived here. I've had clients that, as of a few months ago, had never even heard of Hunterdon or knew anything about it, and that now they live here. And I think that's going to continue as like work situations change and people get, more comfortable with longer commutes because they're not going into the office every day and stuff like that. That Hunterdon was bound to eventually hit that. I think that's only going to increase over the years. I also think that it's good for Hunterdon. I think that's a very polarizing subject, and a lot of people don't like, quote unquote outsiders coming into Hunterdon. But, let me tell you, I'm 40 years old. I've lived here all my life, with the exception of college and a year after that. We have to have new people and hopefully, more diversity and, new ideas and new money and everything else come to Hunterdon, or it's not going to, it's not going to always stay the same. And I think that's a lot of people's hangups is that people coming from the outside are going to create big changes to Hunterdon County. And it's, and what we love so much about it. But, in my experience, the people that I've dealt with that are coming from out here are great people, great families. And, they're so honored to be here. And they, the things that they are coming from, whether that's East New Jersey or Staten Island or Long Island or New York or whatever. And then they come here and they see what their dollar can do in Hunterdon County. And they're just so thankful to be here. So, it's not, people, I think, locally tend to put that whole idea in a box that it means bad things for our area. there's always this like ongoing New York, New Jersey rivalry that, we're all aware of. That, New York people see, or New Jersey people see New York people as a thing, and New York people see New Jersey people as a thing. But listen, we're all after the same thing, just trying to, have a decent life and everything. And, it's good to have, new ideas and new money and, good, new, happy people moving into town, and they're all happy to be here. It's nothing more than that. So, I think we're going to continue to see that. I don't think that's stopping anytime soon, and I think it's a great thing for Hunterdon County. It's going to help all of us. It's going to make property values go up. It's, if things just stay the way they are. I mean, I look at, I live in Pittstown, and there's areas of Pittstown, right on Quakertown Road where I live, that, there's holes of like these old, Victorian era houses, or similar to Center Street in Clinton here. And my concern with those is always like, younger buyers don't typically look at those types of houses. So my concern is always like, who's going to take those houses? I don't want them necessarily to turn into rows of rental homes. Because I think that you have to have a balance there. I think some of them can be, for sure. There's multifamilies kind of sprinkled throughout Hunterdon, not nearly as many as neighboring counties. And, those will always be rentals, and that's totally fine. Everyone needs a place to live, and it's good to have a few rentals. There's quite a few on West Main Street here in Clinton. But sprinkled in amongst those are houses that have kind of, they've been in one generation for a long time. They're in a little bit of disrepair. And, for me as a local in Hunterdon County, the thing that I worry about the most is that someone's going to take that house and kind of reimagine it and make it nice again. Because if that doesn't continue to happen, then we have a problem. It's not outsiders coming into our area. It would be a lack of interest of coming into our area that would be really problematic. So I do think that, and I'm just going off of, anecdotal observations from local Facebook groups and people complaining. There was a sign in, Holland Township for quite a while about New Yorkers go away, and like stuff like that. I don't understand. I mean, my mom was born in New York. My father is from Booton. They lived in Scotch Plains, and then my parents lived in Garwood. They came west to Hunterdon County in 1970 as very young first-time homebuyers, and they have established a life here. And but that story is not unique. It's still happening. And I think people just have to remind themselves of that. So yeah, I mean, it's funny. I actually had a client last year. They were from New York, but they had lived in Hunterdon for 15, 20 years, and they were going back to New York, but they were on upstate New York. And I told them that same story about the sign because it was fairly close to their house. And they laughed because I think of them as Hunterdon County residents, but they are from New York. Like, that's where they're from, and that's where they went back to. So they did move to, like I said, they moved to upstate. But and they're great people. They were really great people. I think New Yorkers and New Jersey people have a lot more common than we like to think. If you compare us to people from Wisconsin, I think the New York and New Jersey people would see eye to eye a lot more than the people from Wisconsin or something. So I think it's a good thing for our market. I hope it continues. As far as buying nowadays, yeah, so I think this article is very on point, is that the transactions are going down. So we're not seeing the 20, 30 offers anymore. But what we are seeing is multiple offers that are very heavy-handed. That is still happening. It's not going away anytime soon. I think every realtor would tell you we are all just hoping to get through this period to when this is not happening anymore. It's just high emotions, high stakes. We all make a living doing this. So, when it's so hard to acquire a home, it's extremely stressful to our profession, because, this is literally how I feed my family. And if it's really hard to find a home, I basically have to maintain a larger client base, because I know that it's slower transactions and less transactions. So I have to maintain a bigger client base. Whereas I used to just be like, I'd get a new buyer and they'd be like, I want to buy a house. I'd be like, all right, great, let's buy you a house. And then we'd go find a house and we'd buy it. Almost never multiple offers. That was actually rare. One or two offers on every listing that was it. Now, I always remind people, it only takes one other offer to knock you out of the mix. But Obviously, in a competitive situation, I've mentioned many times, I have my proprietary way that I put my offers in. It's been successful for me. So I'll take my chances against one other offer. But when you're talking about 20 other offers, it's really tough. I have managed to get through it, but it's not without its challenges. So, um, and that's something to think about with your agent when you're selecting an agent. I've talked about this many times as well. Is if you don't have a strategic agent these days, it ain't like it used to be. You could really kind of use the people that might do it part time, or they might sell 3 or 4 houses a year to friends and family and stuff like that. I'm not telling you that those agents aren't capable. In fact, if someone's been doing that for 10 or 15 years, then they've probably been through a few of these types of markets. But it is something that I think should be discussed. Make sure that you have a very clear understanding of what their strategy is, and whether or not they have a track record of having success with that strategy. Because I think that's the biggest thing you could do to kind of limit yourself. I have clients that have come to me and said, we are striking out left and right. And I'm like, well, how many offers have you put in? We put in offers on 8 different houses. When you're getting to that point, you better either have a very clear explanation. And it's very possible that you've put your best foot forward on 8 homes and struck out. It is possible. I personally haven't experienced that with any of my clients. But if you are at that point, then, it does probably it is probably worth it at that point to just check in with your realtor and say, all right, we've struck out 8 times. What is the strategy here? And why do you think we're missing out? And maybe they have a very clear answer. Maybe you're using an FHA loan, or you're putting 3% down or something like that. And yeah, it's going to be really challenging. And then maybe the strategy is more about finding the opportunity and how you could do that. But if they can't tell you what their strategy is for putting an offer in, because I will tell you, as someone who gets a lot of offers as a listing agent, that there are the majority, I mean, like literally 90% of agents do not have a strategy. They just throw offers at us. And, I think the worst thing you can ever do as an agent is put an offer in without having talked to the listing agent. Like if one just shows up in my inbox when I have a listing and I just get an offer in my inbox, I barely remember this person showing the house. I've definitely never talked to them. That is a mistake. That is absolutely a mistake. It is almost a non-starter unless that offer is through the roof, because I just have no context. And, that can be a real problem. Another thing that I'm going to recommend, and again, I always try to kind of loop in something from stuff that I observed, in this given week. Pre-approvals. So I recommend this to all my clients all the time, but a combination of things. Number one is that a lot of people don't have time because the first thing is people come to me without a pre-approval. I tell them to get a pre-approval. And I'll show them houses if they're in the process and my lender calls me and says, hey, I heard from your client, Mr. Smith, and he's working on his pre-approval. And then I call Mr. Smith, hey, I talked to, my lender, Todd, and he said, yeah, they're working on your pre-approval. Is there something you'd like to see in the meantime? And then what it almost inevitably ends up happening is they immediately find a house they like, and then we're underway. The other side of it is they see a house first and they really want to look at it because they know how fast it's going to go. And I say, all right, well, do you have a pre-approval? No. I'm like, well, then you're in for a very tumultuous, 1 or 2 days while you get that done, because you got to pull all your paperwork and everything else, and you got to get that pre-approval. And meanwhile, that house is being shown. So that's another problem. But if you are deliberate about it, you got your pre-approval in place, and now you're shopping in homes. The next step that I recommend to people all the time is getting a pre-underwritten pre-approval. And not every lender does this. I always advocate for Todd Mershon. He's one of my primary lenders. I know some of our other in-house lenders do it as well. The big banks, I'm not sure, because I don't deal as much with them. That's a whole nother subject. But I would say this means that basically they're going to take your file and they're going to throw it over to underwriting before the whole buying process starts. Underwriting is going to look to see if there's any flags or there's any causes for concern or anything ahead of time, so there's no surprises down the road. Now, when I put in your offer, I get to tell that other agent this is pre-underwritten, because the biggest problem that we have is when it gets to underwriting is when we discover that it doesn't get to underwriting until you're about 10 days out from closing. So maybe sometimes if you have a good lender, maybe 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks. But having that, being able for me, the agent, to be able to put in that offer, that is a big plus. That's hugely helpful. And any listing agent should know that, because I recently mentioned something that fell apart for me, and that was the problem. I was the listing agent. That was the problem, is the buying agent. I shouldn't say the buying agent. I really don't know if it's their fault, but the lender that the buyer was using didn't do even the most basic of due diligence. Now, there are all sorts of ethics questions here, as far as what the responsibilities of a lender is to let their buyers know the expectations, and then the buyers let the buyer's agent know, and the buyer's agent asks the buyers. There's all kinds of variables here, but the bottom line is taking that extra step of due diligence and getting it pre-underwritten makes your offer so much stronger. And right now, the only thing you should be looking for, and this is why I mentioned strategy, is making your offer as strong as possible. So something to think about. Most local lenders offer this. Some of the big banks do, but definitely consider a pre-underwritten offer. I got a question here from JT. Let me see here, JT. See if I can help you out. Where would you recommend buying multi-units for under 125K? I'm seeing properties that will get me close to 2K rent in Indiana. Good question. I think there's a lot more of this going on. Some of the areas that I'll just give you a very anecdotal answer here. I think the most appealing options to me these days, for me personally, and those around me, we have a lot of, here at my brokerage, we have a huge investor club, and we are constantly sharing ideas, and we have people that are operating at an extremely high level, operating 50 doors, buying multi-family big units. There's a couple things that I like right now. I'm really keen on the Airbnb market. So if you can get your hands on something in the Orlando area, for example, you're going to be around that price point that you mentioned, under 125K. A lot of times the facilities that they're at have like in-house management that will actually help you. It's very smart for communities to do this too, because it keeps the values of the house up. If it also appeals to investors like JT or myself that are just looking to use this as an Airbnb investment. The communities that have stayed away from making any sort of rules around the short-term rentals it's very smart, because it keeps that value up. Because if someone lives there and they we don't use this unit anymore, and they want to sell it, now they can sell to both people that want to go to Orlando all the time and people that are just looking for investment opportunities. So it just keeps that value high. I know there's for 125K, there's been some stuff in the Carolinas that I've seen. I know Myrtle Beach was doing great, but Myrtle Beach has blown up so much that I think that's kind of gone out. My client just bought one in Myrtle Beach. I think he said he paid $240. He doesn't actually rent it out, but I think there would be a good opportunity there. Gulf Shores in Alabama is another one that's a pretty appealing. And again, all these places I'm mentioning, if you just go look up, these prices, I'm sure you're going to see stuff that's off the charts, but there are opportunities, mostly condo opportunities within a unit. Now, the nice thing about that is they generally have like some sort of in-house management that will work with you in Airbnb turnovers, or they can recommend cleaning services and stuff like that. But if you're talking about buy and hold, I don't have a ton of experience with it, but areas like Michigan, outside of Detroit, I've heard that there's a lot of opportunities. I've heard of some in Georgia, where you're starting to get into that price. And I'm assuming that you're talking about per door, or are you talking about 125K total? I'm not sure. But yeah, they're it's funny, like years ago, people were making a killing. Is a high risk. I would never recommend the strategy. And I'm not speaking as a real estate agent. I'm talking back before I was a real estate agent. People were flipping properties via eBay. So they were buying these, burned out properties. A lot of the ones that I saw were outside Detroit for like 20 grand. Now, keep in mind, you're inheriting any sort of tax arrears and anything else that's associated with that property. And then they were flipping them before they would even step foot on the property. Obviously extremely risky. But I know a lot of those areas are still prone. So Cleveland and Detroit are two areas that I've looked. But JT, if you're still listening, where are you physically located? But what I am seeing a lot more is people doing it remotely. So we're in New Jersey, and we have a lot of people that are, buying and selling and Florida and Alabama and Texas and South Carolina and all these other places, because it just becomes a lot more easy to manage. And I will tell you that the tech has got us there too, because if you are doing the Airbnb thing, first of all, be very careful wherever you're buying doesn't have short-term rentals, and you can even be a little more proactive and see if it's even being talked about. A lot of times, if you check the local news, you'll see this. I just saw one today that they were talking about. Hawaii, on the Big Island in Hawaii, they were talking about limiting rentals to 90 days. So basically killing the rental market. And I think that's very interesting because that is definitely a decision, kind of a prestige decision, right? They want to kind of kill a certain type of activity. And, that makes sense in somewhere like Hawaii, high price points and very expensive place to live. And just kind of a high end vacation. That makes sense that they might want to do something like that. And that's a decision. It's a lifestyle decision. That's fine. But places like Orlando and even places in the Jersey Shore, I know we were looking in Lavallette, Ocean Beach. I'm sure some people watching this are familiar with Ocean Beach. Similar opportunities existed, although the pricing in New Jersey has kind of killed the opportunities that we had seen. But there's a lot of, if you're going to do that Airbnb route, the tech has gotten caught up so that there are a lot of opportunities to do that as far as automating and management of cleaning services and stuff like that. There's so many fun apps. I say apps, they're web apps, like, web services that do those things for you and really get you closer to being on autopilot with those things. So, but thank you for the question, JT. I appreciate it. And if anyone else has any questions, they're probably going to have to wait till next week because I have to bounce out of here. I have a showing in 5 minutes right here in Clinton. So, yeah, I thought that was, I thought that article was fascinating. I mean, I can't believe that we're reporting 20% increases in prices over the past year. It's, I don't know how much higher they can go. Excuse me. It's also allergy season. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really crazy. I mean, could they go up another 20% over the next year? I mean, I would think that was just as crazy as if you had told me the same thing last year. So, I don't know. It's just a simple supply and demand situation currently. So, yeah, it's just a crazy market. I think it's kind of uncharted territory. A lot of people are very quick to point to 2006 through 2008, and this is not the same thing. I mean, that was also a shift in a market that was, very meaningful and caused huge changes in the industry and the way people look at, home sales. And in fact, a lot of times the listings we're getting today are bailing people out from that period when things went bonkers. This current market is really the first time those people have had an opportunity to get out of it and make their money back when they paid at that peak. So, especially at the lower price points, like it's the first time they've ever even been able to come close to what they paid for it. So, yeah, it's a very different shift that's happening right now. It's much more around supply and demand. That was obviously, there were other factors that we all know about at this point with that last one, but, largely around lending practices. And, there was legislation to correct that. And that's why our rates are so low now to some degree and yada, yada, yada. So, but it's interesting. So, I think if you hear those, if you're working with a realtor, you're looking to buy or sell, or if you're not working with a realtor, just make sure that you stay away from making assumptions based on things that you're hearing out in the wild. People are just saying big talking points. Oh, you can't get a house right now. People are making offers 100,000 over asking, still not getting a house. Those things are true, but there's a lot of context that has to be added to that story. Those things are often, completely blown out of proportion. That people assume that's the norm. It really is not the norm, especially as it pertains to a place like Hunterdon County. So, hopefully that was helpful. Good amount of people stopped by today. I appreciate that. Appreciate the question, JT, if you're still there or if you watch this later. And hopefully we'll get some more questions in the future. Again, as always, if you have anyone that has a local business or anything, or even a online business or Etsy shop or anything they want to promote, please feel free. I just want to have the opportunity to meet more people and promote small businesses here on the broadcast. And we do this every Friday. So I'm sure we can arrange it. The hardest part for me is like tracking people down and actually trying to schedule them. So that's it. Hope you guys all enjoy the great weather, and I will see you all next Friday. All right, take care.